The next session is the second in a series of heart talks from climate scientists, streamed in from around the world, the Himalayas, the Antarctic and the Amazon. The first of such series gave us a look into Antarctica. Now we'll take a look at the world's most important global resources, the Hindu Kush Himalaya, home to more life, culture, beauty and biodiversity than you can even begin to imagine. The Hindu Kush Himalaya is a microcosm of the world around us and the source of clean drinking water for close to 2 billion people. Dr. Arun, Senior Climate Change Specialist at the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, will take us behind the scenes. Let's go over to Dr. Arun for a behind-the-scenes look at the Hindu Kush Himalaya.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Hello, everyone. It's certainly a great pleasure to be here and be able to present on this topic, resilience to water challenges in the Hindu Kush Himalaya, from local climate-smart solutions to regional mechanisms. Before I start, I would like to remind you that if you have any questions, please do post them in the Q&A panel, and towards the end of my presentation session, we'll have a short Q&A session. To go ahead, I just wanted to start with, giving a context, taking you to this place called Hindu Kush Himalaya region. What is unique about this, of course, you can see from this image, is that it is a very, topographically significant area. What you see here is Hindu Kush Himalaya region. This part in the north is Tibetan Plateau. It starts in the far from Afghanistan, then India, Pakistan, India, Nepal, Bangladesh, and so on. So this mountain area is shared by 8 countries. And because of this, topography, what we have is called the monsoon. The monsoon is, in the summer it is southeasterly, and then in the winter it is westerly, which brings the moisture to this region. And also it nourishes vast amount of snowfields, glaciers, and permafrost. And that's why it's also called the third pole. You have listened to Antarctica, and this is also sometimes called the third pole because of the vast amount of snow and ice present here. And it also nourishes many different large river basins, and it's also therefore called the water tower of South Asia. And therefore, it is also a global asset for food, energy, water, carbon, and cultural and biological diversity. As I said, it actually is a source of 10 major large river basins, which are shown here in cyan color. The Hindu Kush Himalaya region actually is shown in blue color, and it sources those 10 major river basins. It is shared by 8 countries, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Myanmar, and China. Those 10 river basins, out of them 7 are also transboundary. Within the Hindu Kush Himalaya region, the blue area, 240 million people live. But if you count the people also living in the downstream in the basin, it is 1.65 billion people. Now, if you add those together, it comes to something like 1.9 billion. Which is a very significant number, actually. It is 1/4 of the total, global population, which is quite significant. So what happens here in terms of climate and environmental change is very important. Having said that, I would also like to show you this picture. The red dots actually means where most of the people live. And you can clearly see that most of the people do not live in the mountainous area, Hindu Kush Himalaya region, but in the downstream. So that's why, what happens is that the policy decisions are made in places like Delhi or Dhaka, which actually doesn't often, consider what's happening in the mountain. That's very important. So what is actually happening in the mountain? So I would like to show this with this picture. I'm sure you have been, following the UNFCCC climate change discussions, and in 2015 there was this Paris discussion which said that the global climate by the end of century should be actually limited to 1.5 degree. But then we looked at it, what it means for Hindu Kush Himalaya region, and we found that even 1.5 degree, which is very ambitious by all means, could be still very hot for Hindu Kush Himalaya region because of this phenomena called amplified elevation dependent warming, which means that in the higher altitude it warms more than in the plains. So 1.5 degree under a very moderate climate change scenario, which is called RCP 4.5, could mean something like 2.5 degree plus and minus 1.5 degree by the end of the century, right? Uh, uh, RCP5. So in 1.5, it could be 2.1. Then if we go by the current emission scenario, which is something like 8.5, RCP 8.5, it could be as high as 5.5 degrees plus minus 1.5, which is a tremendous number actually. It could mean very, very, serious impact in this region. So, and then for higher altitude, it will be definitely very much higher than 1.5, in Karakoram 2.2, in central Himalayas too, and southeast Himalayas too. So it will be significant higher in the region, which means, even if we manage to limit the warming by 1.5 degree by the end of the century, 1/3 of our glaciers will vanish, which is very significant. Then if we go by current emission scenarios, 2/3 of those glaciers will vanish, which will mean many, many different kinds of impact, in this region to people and livelihood. Of course, snow covers and all that will also be impacted. Now let's look at what could be the impact on water. Just to start with, those two panels, left and right, shows how much, glacier melt is contributing to the water in this region and how much snow melt is contributing to the water. Red means high and green means low. Of course, it is, spatially different. In the West, it is highly glacier dominant, but not in the East. But then, there are some areas where it is snow melt dominant. So we looked at this, we looked at how climate change could impact this water availability in the region. And we found out that, at least till the end of the century, there will not be kind of like very acute, shortage of water. And why it is happening? Because of course the meltwater will reduce, but the monsoon and probably the westerly will intensify. So it will balance out. So the total availability will not change, but that's not the most important thing. What we also found is that, the extremes will be changing. Extremes are both floods and drought. And in this chart, what is shown is how extremes are likely to change in the end of by the end of the century. For extremes, we have, kind of represented as 50-year return period flood. And in the chart, it shows, according to color, at least, the 50-year return period will flood will increase by 100%. That means it will double. In average, the 50-year return period flood will double, which means, just for an example, if at any location, the 50-year return period flood, having a likelihood of repeating every 50 years, is, let's say, 1,000 cubic meter per second, under this climate change scenario, it could increase to 2,000 cubic meters per second, right? So that is going to have quite a lot of impact in this area. Of course, this area is naturally disaster prone. There are different kinds of disaster, and our studies shows that in the past decades, those disasters are increasing in terms of number of events, increasing in terms of number of people killed and affected, and of course, economic losses are also increasing. And climate change probably has a certain role to play in all this. Flood, drought, landslide, glacial lake, outburst flood. I'll talk about glacial lake, outburst floods slightly later. But it seems like flood is one of the most important kind of hazard in this region. And our estimate shows that more than 1 billion people in this region are at risk of increasing frequency and intensity of natural hazards. And of course, women, because of the cultural and social setting in this region, are more susceptible to natural disasters than men. That also needs to be considered. Now, I said that the water availability might not change by the middle of the century, but it is also very much dependent on where you are, which place you are. And in the headwaters, particularly in arid regions like in Indus Basin, in upstream part of Pakistan, it might be quite significant. This two panels shows same glacier, Pasu glaciers in Gilgit-Baltistan, Pakistan, in 2009 and 2014. the red arrow shows a canal actually coming out of the glacier, irrigation canal, supplying water to farm. In 2009, it has running water. In 2014, it was dry because the glacier had subsided and the water intake was not functioning. So this kind of things are happening quite widespread in the headwaters, and even forcing people to migrate out because they do not have enough water to irrigate their canals. So that's kind of differences are there. So in arid region, it could be a very important factor, the climate change. But then in this region there are a lot of places which are called mid hills, middle mountains, which is not fed by snow and glacier melt, and mostly groundwater and spring sources are the dominant source of water for people. And what we have seen is that those spring sources are drying out and creating a lot of problem for water. So people are forced to get whatever water they can get from those dirty snowfields, and people lining up near a water spout waiting for hours to get their turn to collect a small amount of water. So that's a big problem around here. The other very direct impact of climate change is formation of glacier lake, like what is shown here. Glacier has receded, and once the area occupied by glacier is now occupied by glacier lake, and sometimes those glaciers actually burst out and create what is called glacial lake outburst flood or GLOF. I'm just, you might not be familiar with this phenomena, so I'm just going to show a small video clip to actually demonstrate what it is like. So it doesn't have an audio, don't, I'm still here. There's nothing wrong, so it's very short. Right. So this just to demonstrate what a glacial lake outburst flood could be. So I have just talked about what are the challenges, what are the changes happening. But then we know that these changes are likely to happen. So we have to manage those changes. We have to adapt to those changes. So what does it mean by adapting to changes? So first of all, minimizing the risks, right? That is utmost important. So and for doing that, what we must do is to understand the risks. So understand what are the risks in the river basins, what are the different kinds of hazard, how do they cascade, how do they get connected across the scale and across the sector. So I think that's very important. But what again I would like to note here that not everyone is equally vulnerable to those disasters. So there are certain vulnerable communities, certain vulnerable sectors. So we need to identify them if we are talking about managing the risk. So just to give you another snapshot of those hazards: glacial lake outburst flood, seasonal floods due to rainfall, of course drought also, erosion and sedimentation, landslide. So these are some of the natural hazards we are facing in Hindu Kush Himalayan region. But then there are opportunities. We have vast amount of water. So I think it is also about maximizing the benefits. So that means understanding what are the opportunities related to water resources and how to balance the uses. There are multiple uses of water and multiple sectors using water. So how to balance the water use without creating conflicts, and understand what are the benefits and beneficiaries, and also how the benefits can be shared, right? So again, going back with some of those, benefits of water resources. So now I'll talk about some of the interventions we have been doing, to address those challenges. I have talked about spring. So here, what I'm showing is a spring shed. You must have heard river basin and watershed. Watersheds are, topographic features where water collect and drain out in a stream and then to a river. But then spring sheds are more than watershed. It might contain more than one watershed. So it is a combination of groundwater, surface water, and the groundwater sources coming out in a point as spring. And as I mentioned, it's a very important water resources in the mid hills for villages and urban centers as well. But then what we are seeing is that the spring sources are declining quite a lot. in this region. And the causes could be infrastructure development, land use and land cover change, excessive pumping of groundwater, and of course, climate change also. So this is a very big problem in this region. So to address those, we have developed what we call a 6-step methodology for spring revival, which combines a very basic geohydrological investigation and certain methods to increase the recharge to the groundwater and to the springs, which has been very successful. And it has been piloted in different areas in the region. So that was one example. To improve the access to water, for example, in the case of Pasu, this could be also very helpful. This is a very simple technology called hydraulic ram pump technology, which uses only the energy of flowing water, no external energy. Very simple device which can, kind of lift water, running water from one place to another, especially because in mountains the fields are in the higher altitude. So this has been quite effective, and I'm going to show you a very short clip as well here. Unfortunately, I could not share the audio here. It has an audio background music, but it is. I think you will not be able to hear that. But definitely, the message should be transferred to the caption. This particular example is from, again, Pakistan, in Gilgit-Baltistan, from a village called Khyber, which has a bit of shortage of water because the land was in the upper side, the river was flowing down. So we implemented a pilot where we installed this mechanism, very simple mechanism called hydro ram pump. And you can see the water actually spilling out. It is not a technical defect. It is designed like that. The excess water actually flows out and flows back to the river, and a small amount of water is delivered upstream to the field. This, in combination with an efficient irrigation system and agriculture system, has proven to be very effective for local farmers. Okay, I'll stop here and move on. Another thing which we have been working on is the solar pump irrigation system, SPIS. There could be a different scale, but we are talking about small scale, 1.5 horsepower pumping system, which is very, very effective for small farm holders. Provides reliable and affordable technology for year-round irrigations, and as I said, benefits small farm holders. But of course, financing is important. Financing mechanism is something which we have been working and trying to understand what financial mechanism would be most beneficial for people. Of course, it has to be implemented in area with sufficient groundwater and not having groundwater declining problem. It is again a technology which is very convenient for women farmers because it is very simple to run. Just turn it on and water starts flowing in. So also very much liked by women farmers. Another technology to address the flash floods in tributaries is called community-based early warning system, which we have piloted in many areas in different parts of the region. What it essentially is basically a system that measures the water level in the upstreams and has different telemetric devices which can transfer the message downstream. And it provides flood information in advance. So basically, it has to be cost effective. But since we call it CBFUS, Community-Based Flood Early Warning System, people should be a central part of it. And it provides near real-time information and has a response mechanism. Another very popular, kind of, system we have been working on. So these were some, local scale interventions, solutions we have been piloting. And then we work at different scale, and also another scale we are working on is on bringing together, researchers, practitioners, policymakers in a regional platform, also scientists, to discuss climate change adaptation and resilience, options and what we need to do as a region collectively than individually. So for that, we have been, supporting various knowledge platforms, networks, and hubs. One example is called the Upper Indus Basin Network. Upper Indus Basin is shared by 4 countries: Afghanistan, India, China, and Pakistan. So we have been bringing together those countries to talk about the challenges and solutions, how collectively it can also be addressed. Koshi Dirara Knowledge Hub is another similar example. Koshi is a sub-basin of Ganges. And for some thematic area like cryosphere change, we have this HKS Cryo Hub. Cryosphere meaning glacier, snow, all the frozen sphere. We host extensive amount of data collected, let's say from satellite information, from different modeling exercises, and also from the ground through our regional database, which is open for everyone to access. We also, host regional flood information, which also based on ground as well as satellite communication, transferring flood information at regional scale. So these were some of the snapshots of what we have been doing in terms of resilience solutions. Of course, there are more. So finally, I would like to mention here that, the climate change is actually having a significant impact in this region. And there, we have been practicing, implementing different solution packages, which have been quite successful here. What is important is to scale those practices, and then what it means is also to replicate those in scale. So at the end, what I would like to mention here that if you are interested in any of those interventions which I have kind of mentioned, and if you'd like to know more, please do drop us a short note. I have posted my email address here also. If you want to collaborate with us, or if you have any other ideas which you think would be piloted, we will be very happy to discuss. The link to my presentation, which is actually a ArcGIS story map format, is also provided here. So please feel free to share it with your friends, your colleagues, your network, and know more about what we are doing. So with that, I will end my presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Right. Dr. Arun, this is Sharon here. Thank you very much for that very informative presentation. Now, just a reminder for those that are listening in, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and send it along, and I will try and ask Dr. Arun those questions as well. But let me just kick this off to ask. I've read reports that the ice, you talked about it being the third pole because of the vast amount of ice there. But I've read reports that scientists are estimating that by 2100, that's about 80 years away, all the ice would have melted. Are we still heading towards that trajectory? Is it still that kind of timeline that we're looking at for all the ice to melt at the Hindu Kush Himalaya?
Thanks. Certainly, we are not seeing a scenario like that, meaning that all the ice will be lost. We are in a region where the mountains are very high. So even with a very significant warming, there will still be ice there. But the scenario I have presented that in 1.5 degree world, we'll lose 1/3 of the ice. And if we go by current warming scenario, then it would be 2/3 of the ice by the end of the century. But then we do not think that total vanishing of all the ice will happen.
Mm-hmm. Now, we've also seen, many reports across the whole pandemic period, COVID-19. There are parts of the world that had pollution clearing up a little bit, waters becoming cleaner, that sort of thing. Did we see any such impact in the region?
Yes, we did see because of the COVID and the lockdown, a lot of energy was not used, fossil fuel, etc. Movements, industries were limited, and therefore we could actually have a very clear atmosphere that did. But it was a short kind of positive change. but it also indicated that it is possible. Like if we come together and try, we could still rescue the environment from, being damaged permanently. I think that was the good part of it. But it was short.
Right. So what do you think? What are some of the main actions that we would definitely need to protect the region and ensure the sustainable mountain development? You talked earlier about having to bring together researchers, practitioners, policymakers, scientists, and also you supporting the networks and hubs and knowledge platforms. But is that enough?
Well, it's not enough, right? I think broadly we can talk about two areas. One is to manage the root cause. And the root cause is the global warming, the climate change. And we know how to do that. There have been global level discussions. So that needs to continue. Mitigation of climate change definitely has to happen, right? But we also know that there are challenges. And even if we manage to reduce the emission, the impact will be there. So impact has to be managed. So that's what is about the adaptation. And adaptation, as I kind of mentioned, it can happen at local scale. There are different local scale adaptation mechanism, but it's also collective actions by different countries, but also collective actions by the global community. So for that, I think those platforms which I mentioned, networks and hub can actually bring together people, discuss about the problem, and also discuss about the solutions, right? Because this kind of problem doesn't limit to any political boundary. It is it's regional, it's transboundary, so it has to have this transboundary approach. So for that we are trying to do this. Yes, I think both track, the mitigation track and adaptation track, have to happen.
Right. Do you think it's a question of money? Everything, all roads lead to money most of the time. So is it a question of money? Would directing funds to the cause, what are some of the challenges you're facing with regard to that, attracting green financing?
It does, money does matter, right? I mean, to implement those kind of pilots in scale, definitely you need resources, but resources are not the only problem. It has to be recognized as a priority by governments and all the stakeholders, and to understand that there are solutions. There could be solutions. There could be sustainable solutions, right? And these are context specific. So one has to recognize what are the solutions, where these solutions could be implemented. But then it is not only about technology. It is about customizing the technology according to the specific needs. It is being owned by the local people, local governors, so government. So it is also about governance. So all those are combined, but definitely resources, green climate funding, etc. I think it is very important. So there are many different factors which actually limits to the extent these things are happening. Yeah.
Now we have probably just under a minute left to our conversation, but if I asked you to underline just one most urgent need that the action that needs to be done, what would that be, and how do you think you can make that happen?
I think one most important thing is to for the people, which means people meaning not only like community people, but governments also to recognize that this is a common problem, and they should put aside all the rest of the problem and come together and discuss the climate and environmental problems and try to see how collectively it can be solved.
One main action that one main action that these collective leaders of the world have to definitely do, what would that be?
Well, that would be, how best they can manage the climate change. What are the local, solutions they can provide, but also look for the global solutions. I think that is one big issue I would like to suggest to them.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Arun.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Arun there from the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development. Thank you very much again.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Arun, for showing us the Himalayas and its importance.